gamers. In the decade following the turn of the century, first-person shooters had become a dime a dozen, especially those of the military variety. The likes of Battlefield and Call of Duty dominated with minimal competition, inspiring copycats that rarely innovated the genre. Before long, the market grew oversaturated with experiences created by developers and publishers desperate to obtain a modicum of success achieved by EA's and Activision's flagship shooters. There did exist a fair few outliers, though. Shooters whose creators, for the most part, chose to buck the trend instead of following the herd. Raven Software's oft-forgotten 2010 title Singularity counted as one such project. As Raven's final original game before its conversion into a Call of Duty support role, Singularity constituted the last bastion of originality during a transitory period for publisher Activision. All told, it did not seem an unworthy attempt either. Despite a development cycle beset by mismanagement, Raven cobbled together a competent temporal shooter, one laden with inventive ideas that were hamstrung by formulaic game design choices. Dismal sales further handcuffed the franchise, since Singularity failed to gain traction in a marketplace flooded with other by-the-number shooters. Thus, Raven spent much of the decade following Singularity's release beholden to someone else's vision, its potential absorbed into the gears of Activision's well-oiled Call of Duty machine. Yet, Singularity shouldn't be remembered as a failure per se. Signs of triumph lingered within its faults, remnants of what could have been under different circumstances. This is the history of Singularity.
How does it feel to still be around after these 25 years?
Old.
I mean, we couldn't be here without the fans. I mean, we've been so blessed to be able to work on such a wide diversity of different.
Brothers Brian and Steve Raffel both came from art backgrounds and harbored a shared love of D&D that encouraged them to build paper modules of their own. In 1990, the duo shifted their efforts towards game development, ultimately resulting in the establishment of Raven Software in Madison, Wisconsin. Partnering with programmers Ben Goki and Rick Johnson, the Raffel brothers set to work on their debut title, the first-person RPG, Black Crypt. The four-man team labored over the project's demo for 2 years. Intriguing qualities like real-time 3D movement saw Black Crypt catch the eye of several publishers. Upon signing a contract with Electronic Arts, the fledgling crew found itself in a position to produce games full-time. Black Crypt launched to considerable success on the Amiga in 1992, but EA had bigger plans in mind. Speaking to US Gamer in 2014, Brian Raffel said the publisher convinced Raven to develop games for PC in pursuit of a wider audience. The brothers soon thereafter posted advertisements for PC programmers. As luck would have it, id Software's John Romero stumbled across the job listing and scheduled a meeting with the group. This happenstance, as well as the close proximity of Raven's and id's offices at the time, sparked the beginning of an incredible relationship between the two companies. Throughout the 1990s, Raven carved out its own place in the industry, all while receiving guidance from Romero and other id developers. id Software's groundbreaking technology also proved an integral part of Raven's early accomplishments, considering the latter's breakout hit, Heretic, ran on a modified version of the engine that powered Doom. But it was Heretic's deviations from id's seminal shooter that set the middling dark fantasy game apart from anything else on the market. Yet Heretic's success, and that of subsequent titles, did little to provide Raven's founders with the stability they so craved. For years, Raven Software cultivated a family-oriented group of developers. However, once the Raffles signed an exclusive deal with Activision in 1997, many employees departed. Some staffers feared Activision's corporate-leaning culture would infringe upon the familial dynamic that long sustained the crew. On the contrary, Brian Raffel thought it a strategic step forward. Contract deals of the past had left Raven strapped for funds, with negotiations often disfavoring the small studio. The Raffel brothers wanted to avoid continuously landing in such a position. They'd also grown tired of managing the business side of development. Activision, then, became their saving grace. Once the dust on the acquisition settled, Raven spent the next decade and change creating games based on Marvel, Soldier of Fortune, Star Trek, and Star Wars licenses. Despite producing a couple of projects in conjunction with id Software, the Wisconsin-based team's relationship with the Doom creators waned over time. An unfortunate turn of events exacerbated by ZeniMax Media's purchase of id in 2009. Before the ink dried on the ZeniMax deal, however, Raven and id released Wolfenstein's 2009 entry. id supervised the shooter's production, its last as an independent entity, while Activision served as publisher. Still, this wasn't a good send-off for the id Software of old. Wolfenstein reviewed poorly and sold even worse, moving a mere 106,000 units in the first month. Raven's next endeavor garnered better critical reception, yet it too failed to make a splash commercially.
Shit! It's an EMP!
Set in 2010, Singularity followed Special Forces operative Nathaniel Renko on his journey to investigate strange readings from a desolate island known as Katorga 12 off the coast of Russia. After crash landing on the island, Renko slowly unraveled its hidden mysteries. Singularity's alternate history centered on the Soviet Union's clandestine experiments in the 1950s with E-99, an element capable of warping time. The tests eventually culminated in a cataclysmic accident on the level of a larger-scale Chernobyl, which the USSR successfully masked from the outside world until 2010. Renko's modern-day exploration of the disaster zone allowed him to view the catastrophic events from the 1950s as they unfolded, thanks to a tool Raven created for gameplay and narrative purposes, the Time Manipulation Device, or TMD. The premise was derived from a concept by the Raffel brothers, who drew from their memories of growing up during the Cold War era. In conversations with colleagues, the two recalled exploring an abandoned military base not far from their hometown. These recollections fused well with the Cold War theme of two superpowers competing in a nuclear arms race. Creative director Dan Vondrak later explained that an island replete with horrid secrets was subsequently added to the underlying idea behind Singularity, along with the TMD. For good measure, the creators sprinkled in influences from classic science fiction films. Raven heavily researched the Cold War, employing dates of crucial events to determine what worked best for the narrative's alternate timeline. In spite of Russia's growing popularity as a video game villain, the Cold War era additionally informed the country's characterization as the opposing force in Singularity. This choice also stemmed from what Brian Raffel described as the USSR's capacity for thinking on a massive scale. The developers figured no one would have trouble believing the USSR could accomplish extraordinary scientific feats. Though confident in the core concept, Raven knew winning over Activision would require Herculean efforts. By that point, the publisher had grown more enamored with pushing out sequels, and less so with internally fostering new intellectual properties. Thus, the studio felt that simply creating a pitch document wouldn't suffice. In an interview with Gaming Nexus, Brian Raffel divulged that Raven first crafted a secret demo, something truly showcasing the game's potential. According to him, Activision executives wanted to greenlight it right away. The go-ahead from Activision marked a bold new step for Raven, setting the company on a path that, with time, grew difficult to navigate. Building on the concept's various influences sparked the idea for a neat gameplay mechanic. Brian and Steve Raffel loved the thought of visiting a once disaster-stricken area and unearthing what caused its collapse. Raven reflected the abstraction in-game with the Time Manipulation Device, letting players solve puzzles as well as overcome obstacles and combat challenges by aging and de-aging individual objects. If a ruined stairway obstructed Renko's way forward, for example, players could use the TMD to revert the stairs to a previously functioning state. Interestingly, the protagonist's backstory didn't receive similar attention to detail. Raven purposefully kept information about Renko's personal life to a minimum, so other characters could instead garner plenty of focus. The creative crew specifically tried emphasizing the interactions between side characters and the player in an attempt to simulate the feeling that players were closely involved with the action. A similar balancing act was applied to Singularity's use of flashback sequences. As Vondrak explained in a Big Download interview, Raven limited the frequency of flashbacks as much as possible, never wanting players to lose sight of the main plot. While several areas, puzzles, and narrative beats were designed specifically for the 1950s-centric segments, a few technical challenges emerged during development, primarily due to the demands of streaming in two different versions of the game world. Suffice it to say, Raven had no shortage of compelling plans on the docket. Executing them presented a wide variety of challenges, however, and the signs of trouble weren't overly apparent until the end of production, resulting in Singularity briefly facing cancellation. For Polygon's The Confessional column in 2014, former Raven software developer Keith Fuller described the final third or so of Singularity's development as an incredibly turbulent time. It didn't help that the shooter counted as the only original IP in the works by an Activision studio during that period. As such, the pressure mounted for approximately 2 years while Raven toiled away. In this span of time, the publisher announced Singularity at an E3 2008 press event. The game resurfaced in 2009 with a few trailers, alongside news from Brian Raffel that it had entered pre-alpha with a targeted late 2009 release for PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. But soon after an in-depth showcase at that year's E3, Activision postponed the time-bending adventure's launch to 2010. In a statement given to IGN, the company said no one could have anticipated the level of excitement that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 generated at E3. To give Modern Warfare 2 room to dominate throughout the holiday season, and in turn improve Singularity's chances of success, due dates for the two shooters were spread further apart. Not until Keith Fuller's 2014 column did the reason for the delay become more apparent. Fuller claimed numerous issues caused Raven to miss Singularity's second alpha deadline. Notably, half of the levels didn't run well on PS3. The team also had trouble fitting several maps in the memory on 360. And even high-end PCs suffered massive frame rate drops during combat encounters. Simply put, Raven staffers knew their ambitious new property wasn't in good shape. It took no one by surprise then when an Activision VP advised higher-ups to cancel the game after checking on its status. Singularity sat in limbo for a day, canceled with 2 years of hard work seemingly on its way down the drain. Yet all hope wasn't lost. Activision offered the developers a chance at redemption. In addition to handing control of the project to Raven's Marvel team, which had just shipped X-Men Origins Wolverine, the publisher put forth a 10-month deadline. According to Fuller, those 10 months weren't all devoted to the title's completion either. When factoring in processes such as certification, only 7 months were actually dedicated to finishing the content. Though many considered it an impossible task, Raven accepted the offer, wanting to see its vision through to fruition. Unfortunately, countless sacrifices were made because of the strict deadline. Upon becoming Singularity's project lead, the Marvel team's creative director, Dan Vondrak, spent a significant amount of time revising the narrative. A concerted effort went into salvaging as much of the existing plot as possible, but technically challenging scenes were excised. For instance, Raven originally devised multiple set pieces centered around the time manipulation device. Time constraints meant mere traces of the crew's initial intentions survived the purge. These restrictions further inhibited Raven's ability to explore the TMD's gameplay applications. Consequently, time mechanics felt shallow. Fuller noted that many gameplay decisions during the 10-month crunch were based on what worked well in other games and could be easily implemented in Singularity, hence the BioShock similarities. Although Vondrak's and Fuller's statements concerning BioShock's influence appear contradictory. Vondrak told Gamasutra that Singularity's prototype, originally built on Wolfenstein's engine before the shift to Unreal Engine 3, was completed before BioShock's 2007 arrival. In particular, echo events in Singularity, which depicted past happenings in the environment, seemed modeled after BioShock's audio diaries. Vondrak insisted the echoes existed before anyone knew of Irrational Games' innovation in environmental storytelling. Raven's shooter appeared to borrow from BioShock mechanically too, considering the two-handed method, whereby players controlled the TMD on one hand, like plasmids, and equipped regular weapons on the other. The studio supposedly tried combining the TMD and traditional weapons in one device, but realized through trial and error that the two-handed approach worked best. Though BioShock had already launched by this juncture in production, Vondrak said the developers simply braced themselves for the inevitable comparisons. Contrarily, Fuller wrote that Raven did mimic BioShock's audio diaries. They were cheap to create and additionally provided the perfect means of exposition, allowing writers to fill in whatever gaps were left by the massive rewiring of Singularity's story. Fuller likened the crunch period to triage, in which the crew saved the ideas it could, then bayoneted the rest. Singularity's grueling final months were evident in the end product, but the pieces that did hit the mark managed to impress. Reception vacillated between middling and favorable. Gimmicky time-based mechanics left much to be desired, as did the set pieces and formulaic design decisions. Regardless of these missteps, Singularity's combat brought a level of much-appreciated challenge and fun to first-person shooters. And though the title played like a BioShock clone, critics and players agreed it earned the honor due to the way in which Raven delivered the fiction and circumvented trending concepts of the day. And yet, none of these triumphs were enough to move the needle. Arguably insufficient marketing butchered Singularity's chances of reaching a wider audience. Vondrak posited the project's unconventional qualities may have made it difficult to promote. Meanwhile, Fuller argued Activision did its best under the circumstances of a protracted production cycle that led to higher-than-planned development and marketing costs. In the end, Singularity's lack of commercial success stunted far more than the nascent franchise's future. Layoffs hit Raven Software just 3 months after release, cutting upwards of 40 jobs. Activision addressed the downsizing in a statement to Kotaku, revealing that Raven was in the process of realigning its workforce to better reflect the studio's upcoming slate. The realignment positioned the Wisconsin-based crew as a Call of Duty support team, a role it maintained for the next decade. With Call of Duty's 2020 entry, Raven finally returned to the driver's seat to lead production on Black Ops Cold War's campaign. Now fans who remember the Raven of old simply long for the day when the developer's originality can shine once more, especially since releases for inventive, story-driven first-person shooters have been few and far between in recent years. Should Raven ever receive an opportunity to spread its wings again, there's reason to believe it and the mysteries of Kotorka 12 would be welcome with open arms. Thank you for watching. We'd like to take this time to thank, by name, the generous patrons who have pledged to our Hall of Fame reward tier. Alex Moretti, Caleb Shishkevich, Maktoum Saeed Al Maktoum, and those currently subscribed to our producer reward tier. Darirab Sigurdsson, EmuMovies.com, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, Lame Game Man, Milkshake, Schizo Lingvo. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to our channel and backing us on Patreon.